Some men spend their whole lives trying to earn a seat at the table. I spent 30 years building the table myself, and I promised nobody would ever have to beg me for a place at it, which is exactly why the phone call I got on a Thursday morning in April made my hands go still on the workbench for the first time in longer than I could. Remember, welcome back. Grab your coffee, get settled, and remember, the people in these stories always had a chance to do right by their family. Most of them just didn't take it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss where this one goes. It was an early spring morning in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind where the fog still sits low over the Blue Ridge until about 9, and the air smells like wet pine and coffee. I was 63 years old, standing in my workshop behind the house on Beaver Dam Road, refinishing an old roll-top desk that used to belong to my own father, when my cell phone started buzzing on the workbench next to a can of tung oil. Marcus. Why's he calling me at 10 in the morning on a Thursday? He's supposed to be teaching a class right now. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up. Marcus, what's going on, son? Nothing at first. Just breathing. The kind of breathing a grown man does when he's standing very still and trying not to let his voice give him away. Dad. His voice cracked right on that one word, and something in my chest pulled tight like a rope going taut. I'm at Carrier Park. Can you come get us? Us. Don't move, I said. I'm already walking to the truck. I found him sitting on a bench near the velodrome, the one that looks out over the river, where I used to take him fishing for smallmouth bass when he was 10 years old. Except he wasn't 10 anymore. He was 36, and he was sitting there with his shoulders folded in, like a man trying to make himself smaller than he was. Next to him was my granddaughter, Josie, 7 years old, hugging a stuffed rabbit and swinging her legs off the edge of the bench like nothing in the world was wrong, because nobody had told her anything was. She was wearing my old University of Tennessee cap, the orange one I gave her for her birthday. 2 suitcases sat at Marcus's feet. 2 suitcases. Lord, I didn't say a word right away. I sat down on the other side of Josie, put my hand on her small shoulder, and looked out over the French Broad River for a good 4 or 5 seconds before I looked at my son. Why aren't you at the school? He let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. It was the sound a man makes when things hurt so bad that laughing is the only thing left in the toolbox. I got let go, Dad. Let go. I repeated it flat, giving myself time to think. From Ashford Academy? Yeah. The job you've had for 9 years? The one where you built that whole music program from nothing? Yeah. I nodded slow. Okay. Stay level, Cole. And the suitcases? He rubbed the back of his neck and wouldn't look at me straight on. Harold came by the house last night. Harold, your father-in-law, to the house? Said he'd made some calls. Turns out he's golfing buddies with somebody on the academy's board. His jaw was working like he was chewing on something bitter. He's the one who got me fired, Dad. The river kept moving. Josie kept swinging her legs and humming something to her stuffed rabbit like the whole world wasn't quietly coming apart 6 feet away from her. And Carla? I asked. Carla was his wife, Harold's daughter. Marcus's jaw tightened. She filed for a separation this morning. I turned to look at him full on. All this. Since last night? He told her to. His voice dropped almost to nothing. He called her after he left our place and said if she stayed married to a man who couldn't even hold down a teaching job, he'd cut her off from the family business completely. Said, he stopped, swallowed hard. Said our family wasn't the kind of family that belonged with theirs. I sat with that for a second. Let it sit there in the air between us, the way you let a hornet settle before you decide what to do about it. Grandpa. Josie was looking up at me now, holding out her rabbit. His name is Winston. He's hungry. I looked at that little girl, her father's chin, my late wife's green eyes, 7 years old and completely unbothered because she trusted that the grown folks around her had it handled. He's right to trust that, I said to Marcus, low. Grandpa's got it handled. I stood up slow and deliberate, the way I do when my mind's already 5 steps down the road and my body's just catching up to it. Grab the bags. Marcus blinked up at me. What? The bags, son. Grab them. We're not doing this on a park bench. I reached down and took Josie's hand in mine. We're going for a ride. Dad, where are we? Get in the truck. He knew that voice. Every son knows that voice. The one you don't argue with. The one that only comes out about twice in a lifetime. He grabbed both suitcases without another word. We drove north on Riverside Drive, then cut over toward I-26. Marcus kept glancing at me sideways from the passenger seat, waiting for me to say something comforting, something a father's supposed to say. I turned the radio on instead. George Jones. Seemed about right. Dad, you're kind of scaring me. Good, I said, checking my mirror. Means you're paying attention. Where are we going? Where were we going? 28 years I'd kept this quiet. 28 years of 6 a.m. mornings and midnight phone calls and handshake deals with men who didn't need a lawyer to trust me. 28 years of every dollar going right back into the ground instead of into my pocket. Not one word to anybody. Not my neighbors. Not my brother. Not even Marcus's mother, rest her soul. Not the whole truth of it anyway. 28 years of being the man in the modest brick house on Beaver Dam Road, driving a 15-year-old Ford pickup, because I watched my own daddy get eaten alive the second the whole county found out what he'd built. I swore I'd never make that mistake. But Harold Whitfield had just made a different one. He looked at my son, my own blood, and decided we weren't good enough to sit at his table. He picked up a phone and ended my son's career in one afternoon. He broke up my son's marriage over dinner conversation. He sent my granddaughter to a park bench with a stuffed rabbit and 2 suitcases. On a Thursday. In my town. We came off the interstate onto Old Charlotte Highway out past the airport, past the warehouses and the freight yards, until I turned into a long gravel drive behind a facility that stretched out over 6 acres. Marcus sat up straight in his seat. The sign above the front gate was clean, brushed steel, no frills, no shine to it. Blue Ridge Freight and Logistics. Dad. Marcus's voice had gone quiet in a whole different way now. What is this place? I parked the truck, cut the engine, and sat there a moment looking at what 28 years of silence had gone and built. This, I said, is your inheritance. I opened the door. And we've got a vendor contract that needs a second look. He didn't have the first idea what that meant yet, but Harold Whitfield was about to find out. If this story's got you sitting up a little straighter, do me a favor and hit that like button, and if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. I appreciate you more than you know. There's a particular kind of quiet that fills a room when a man realizes he's been underestimating somebody his whole life. It doesn't come in loud. It doesn't slam a door. It just settles in the way dust settles after something's fallen. I'd been living inside that kind of quiet for most of my working life. Harold Whitfield was fixing to get his first real introduction to it. Friday morning, 7:10 a.m., I was already at the yard before the first shift clocked in. That's a habit I built back in my 30s and never once broke. You want to know if a business is healthy, don't look at the spreadsheets first. Look at who's there before the sun's all the way up and who's still there after everybody else has gone home. I'd been the first one in for 28 years running. My office sat on the second floor, glass windows looking down over the loading docks. Nothing fancy. A desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard covered in numbers that would have made Harold Whitfield's eyes water. On the corner of my desk sat a framed photograph Marcus, at 11 years old, holding up a smallmouth bass he'd caught off that same bench at Carrier Park, grinning like he'd whipped the whole world. I looked at that photo every single morning of my life. That morning it hit different. My yard manager, a big steady man out of Hendersonville named Dwight Pruitt, who'd been with me 19 years, knocked twice and came in at 7:30 on the nose. He took one look at my face and sat down without being asked. You want coffee first, or should I just go on and brace myself? Pull the Whitfield account, I said. Dwight's eyebrows climbed a 1/4 inch. Whitfield Distribution? That's the one. He already had his tablet out. They're 18 months into a 2-year contract, Cole. Their whole regional distribution runs through our trucks. That's better than $2 million a year in freight. $2 million a year. Harold Whitfield had spent the better part of a decade sitting at his country club telling people about his thriving distribution company, never once mentioning to a soul that the engine underneath all of it, the fleet that actually got his product to market, ran straight through my yard. The man called my family unworthy while every one of his invoices had my company's name printed right there at the bottom. I almost smiled. Almost. I'm not canceling the contract, I said. Dwight paused, tablet halfway down. I'm restructuring it. I leaned back in my chair. Pull every clause on vendor performance review. Draft a formal evaluation notice. Standard language, nothing hostile. Let Whitfield Distribution know Blue Ridge is conducting a full-service compliance review effective immediately. All outstanding invoices held pending completion. Standard procedure. It's written right into the contract, Section 6, Paragraph 2. I know because I wrote it myself. They've got 30 days to cooperate before we make a decision on renewal. He nodded slow, the way a man does when he understands that something dressed up as routine is anything but. And who's running the review? I picked the photo of Marcus up off the desk, set it back down facing me. The new director of vendor relations. Dwight blinked. We don't have a... We do as of this morning. He picked up on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. He'd slept in his childhood bedroom for the first time in 18 years. Him and Josie both, her curled up like a kitten in the middle of the old twin bed, him folded around the edge of it like a man trying to make himself small enough to fit. Dad, it's early. It's nearly 9. I didn't fall asleep till almost 4. Fair enough. How's Josie? A pause. I heard him shift, probably leaning over to check on her. Still out cold. Sleeping like nothing happened. His voice went soft. Kids, man. That's because she knows she's safe, I said. You both are. You hear me? Dad. Marcus. I said his name the way I used to when he was 17 and getting in his own way. I need you listening close right now, all right? Not as my boy. As a grown man about to step into something real. Silence down the line. I need you at the yard by 10. Wear something decent. We're walking the floor together. I'm introducing you to the team, and then you and I are sitting down, and I'm going to explain what I've spent my whole life building, and exactly where you fit into it going forward. More silence. Dad? What is Blue Ridge? Oh, son. I picked up my coffee. It's ours. Has been for 28 years. 10 o'clock, I said. Don't be late. And I hung up before he could ask another question. He needed to see it, not hear it. Some things, a phone call just can't carry the weight of. He walked through the front office doors at 9:57. I was standing out on the dock when he came in, watched him through the glass before he ever spotted me. Watched him stop dead just inside the entrance, tilt his head back and take in the warehouse ceiling, 35 feet up, forklifts moving in organized lines, 140 employees working with the kind of rhythm that only comes from years of doing it right. His mouth hung open a little. Good. That's the correct reaction. Dwight met him at the door and walked him over to me. When Marcus got close, he had the look of a man trying to solve arithmetic in his head that kept coming out bigger than he could hold. Dad. He looked around, then back at me. This whole time? This whole time. You drive a 15-year-old truck. Still do. Mom knew. I paused. She knew enough. Knew the parts that mattered. She also knew why we kept it quiet. Money changes people, son. The wrong folks find out what you've got, and suddenly everybody's got a handout and a story to go with it. I started walking, and he fell in step beside me. I wanted you standing on your own 2 feet first. Wanted you to know whatever you became it because it was yours, not because it was handed to you. He didn't say anything for a long while as we walked the floor. A few workers nodded my way. 1 or 2 shook Marcus's hand. A woman named Dolores from the shipping desk looked him up and down and said, "You've got your daddy's eyes." We ended up back in my office. I shut the door, poured us both coffee, and laid 3 folders across the desk. Financials, org chart, the Whitfield vendor file. Marcus picked up the last one. I watched his face while he read it. Watched the second he registered the name. Watched his jaw go tight. Whitfield Distribution, he said, quiet. That's Harold's company. He's been a vendor here 9 years. Marcus set the folder down and looked at me. You're telling me, while Harold Whitfield was sitting at his own dinner table, telling people we weren't good enough for his family, he was making his money off your trucks? The room went very quiet. What's in the folder? Marcus said finally, with a steadiness that honestly caught me off guard. A vendor evaluation notice. All payments held pending review. I slid it across to him. Standard procedure. And who's running it? I slid the second document across. A formal offer letter. Director of Vendor Relations, Blue Ridge Freight and Logistics. A salary that would have made his old teaching pay look like pocket change. His hands went still on the desk. Dad, I don't know the first thing about running a business like this. You built a music program out of nothing at that school for 9 years, I said. You showed up to every one of Harold's Sunday dinners for 9 years, even when the man never once said thank you. You fixed his boat dock with your own 2 hands last summer. I leaned forward. You know how to show up, Marcus. That's most of leadership right there. The rest, I'll teach you myself. He stared at the offer letter a long moment. Come on, son, pick it up. He picked it up. When Harold gets that evaluation notice, he said slowly, he's going to know something's off. He's going to make some calls, I agreed. And eventually, Marcus looked up at me. Eventually, I said, he's going to figure out just whose name has been on that building for 9 years. And then what? Oh, that's the best part. I sat back. Then he's going to have to call you. The quiet that followed was about the most satisfied quiet I'd felt in 28 years of building something in the dark. Marcus set the offer letter down, picked a pen up off my desk, and signed it. The evaluation notice went out to Whitfield Distribution at 4:40 that Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, I had 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I recognized it fine. I let it go to voicemail both times. He wasn't ready to talk to me. He needed to talk to my son first, and Marcus, for the first time in 3 days, was sleeping just fine. Marcus was already standing when Harold walked in Monday afternoon. Not sitting behind the desk trying to look important. Standing, relaxed, sport coat on, hands loose at his sides. The office was clean and quiet, that gray April light coming through the windows, the warehouse humming along steady down below like a heartbeat that hadn't missed a single beat in 28 years. He looked, if I'm honest, like a man who'd belonged in that room his entire life. Harold stopped in the doorway. The silence held for a good 4 seconds. I counted it from the hallway, where I stood just out of sight, close enough to hear it all, far enough back to let my boy have his room. Marcus. Harold's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man walking into something he expected to be one shape and finding it another. Thanks for, Harold. Marcus gestured to the chair across the desk. Come on in. Sit down. In a building Harold Whitfield had been funding for 9 years without ever once knowing whose name was on the deed. I heard the chair scrape, heard the particular stillness that settles between 2 men who've shared Sunday dinners and Thanksgiving tables, and now find themselves sitting across from each other in an entirely different kind of room. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, Harold started. Smooth, practiced. The voice of a man used to talking his way back into people's good graces. About this evaluation notice. We've been a loyal vendor here going on a decade, and if we just sit down and go through the numbers, I think we'll find. There's no misunderstanding, Marcus said. Not loud, not sharp, just settled. Blue Ridge runs a standard vendor evaluation. It's written into your contract. Section 6, paragraph 2. A brief pause. There it is. Marcus. Harold's voice dropped a register, went softer, the involuntary kind of soft that comes when a man feels solid ground turning to sand underneath him. Look, I understand things between our families right now are complicated. I'm not dismissing that. But business is business, and I'd hate for personal matters to color what's been a mutually beneficial. You're right, Marcus said. Business is business. Harold hadn't expected agreement. I could hear it in the pause, which is why I want to handle what comes next the right way. The quiet slide of paper across the desk. There it was. Our team's drawn up a revised agreement. New terms, fair pricing, realistic timelines, standard compliance clauses. Nothing punitive, nothing personal. Harold was reading now. I could picture it, the man in his tailored jacket, silver at the temples. 9 years of comfortable assumptions coming apart line by line, read by the son-in-law he'd tossed out of his daughter's life 5 days prior. 5 days. Harold Whitfield had turned our whole family upside down on a Wednesday night, and by Monday afternoon his entire company's survival was resting in Marcus Edwards's hands, in a building Cole Edwards owned outright. The Lord's got a sense of humor. He just doesn't always show his hand early. These terms, Harold said, starting again. These are reasonable. I know they are, Marcus said simply. I wrote them to be. More quiet. Marcus. Harold's voice shifted again. something underneath it that hadn't been in the room when he first walked through the door. Something older, quieter. The sound of a man who'd been carrying something heavy a long, long time and could feel his grip finally starting to slip. What I said about your family, about your, he stopped on the word. Couldn't quite push it out the second time. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot for a good while now, and I told myself it was principle. It's all right, Marcus said. I forgive you. I appreciate that. The honest response of a man who'd been hurt and wasn't pretending otherwise. The evaluation's going to run its course, Marcus went on. Whatever comes of it professionally, comes of it. But Josie needs her grandfather, her mama's father. Whatever that ends up looking like, that's between you and Carla and the Lord. My jaw tightened out in the hallway. Not from anger, from recognition. That was about the most honest thing Harold Whitfield had said in my presence, and he had no earthly idea I was standing there to hear it. Marcus let it sit. Didn't rush to fill the space, didn't offer cheap comfort or easy forgiveness dressed up as something bigger. Let the man breathe inside his own truth a moment. Which, if you're asking me, was more grace than Harold Whitfield had rightly earned, and more character than I'd have guessed a man his age had it in him to show. I appreciate that, Harold said finally. Genuinely. Marcus's voice stayed even. But I need you to hear something else, Harold. A beat. Not as your vendor. Not as your former son-in-law. As a man. I stopped breathing out in that hallway. My father built something out of nothing. 28 years. Quiet. Never asked anybody's permission or approval to do it. Another pause. He built it for this family. For our name. For Josie. I could hear the steadiness holding through every word. You looked at us and decided we weren't worth your family's name. You made one phone call and cost me my career. You leaned on my wife until she walked out on our marriage. The room had gone dead still, and you ended up sitting across a desk from me in a building that decides whether your company makes it to next year. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Then I heard Marcus slide something else across the desk. A pen, he said. My father always told me real power doesn't need to humiliate anybody. I closed my eyes out there in the hallway. It just makes things real clear. The quiet that followed was the longest 10 seconds of my life. Then, the small, unmistakable scratch of a pen against paper. Harold Whitfield signed the contract. Marcus signed it after him, calm, unhurried, the way a man signs something he already made peace with a long time before he ever sat down. Nobody mentioned bloodlines or worthiness again. Nobody made a speech. Nobody twisted the knife or raised their voice, because there wasn't a single thing left that needed doing. Everybody in that room knew exactly who'd come out ahead. Nobody needed to say it out loud. I walked back downstairs. Didn't go into the meeting. Never did. Walked out to the lot. Stood next to my old Ford and looked up at that gray Carolina sky. A good long while. 28 years. Not one day of it was ever really about getting even. It was about building something solid enough, something rooted deep enough, that when the storm finally did come for my family, there'd be somewhere real for them to stand. I thought about my own father, pressing a coffee can full of cash into my hands with everything he had left in his eyes. Thought about Marcus at 11, grinning over that fish like he'd whipped the world. Thought about Josie in that orange cap, dead serious, telling me her rabbit was hungry, like it was the most important news I'd hear all week. Harold Whitfield had said our family wasn't worthy of his name. This was our family. A grandfather who built in silence. A father who showed up and never once flinched. A granddaughter who didn't understand yet what was being kept safe for her, but who'd spend the rest of her life standing inside the proof of it. There's no amount of money, no vendor contract, no tailored jacket that can put a price on that. I got in my truck, turned the radio back to George Jones, and drove home in my old Ford, through my town, from the company I'd built with my own 2 hands, the same way I'd driven home for 28 years. Quiet, whole, undefeated. If this one meant something to you, go on and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share it with somebody who needs to hear it today. Thank you for sitting with me a while. I'll see you next time.